In a prestigious hospital, the head doctor considers himself untouchable and openly humiliates the new nurse. Colleagues remain silent, and the atmosphere becomes increasingly hostile. But one patient keeps a close eye on what is happening. When the truth comes out, the consequences are unpredictable. Subscribe so you don't miss new stories, and write in the comments what city you're from. The glass facade of Northern Peak Medical Center mirrored the gray sky, a towering beacon of modernity and privilege. The air smelled of antiseptic and fresh linen, every surface polished to perfection, every corner designed to exude excellence. The soft hum of activity echoed through the pristine halls, nurses pushing medication carts, doctors discussing patient charts, monitors beeping rhythmically. Yet, beneath the immaculate exterior, an invisible current of tension buzzed, a current that Miranda Holt felt the moment she stepped through the revolving doors. Her first impression was the cold efficiency of the place. The front desk receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a clipped voice and tired eyes, barely glanced up as Miranda approached. She tapped quickly on her keyboard, sliding a visitor's badge across the marble counter without meeting Miranda's gaze. "Orientation room, 3rd floor. Use the east elevator," the woman said, her tone mechanical. "Thank you," Miranda replied politely, her voice steady despite the knot forming in her chest. As she walked away, she felt the subtle weight of stares, fleeting glances from staff passing by, eyes that lingered a second too long. Some measured her, others dismissed her. Miranda was no stranger to this scrutiny. A black woman in an elite medical institution, she knew the assumptions being formed before she even introduced herself, but she carried herself with the poise of someone who had fought for her place and earned it. The elevator's mirrored walls reflected her determined expression. Her dark curls were neatly pinned back, her uniform crisp, her ID badge clipped to her chest. The name beneath her photo read, Miranda Holt, RN. Her credentials boasted years of experience in trauma care and intensive care units, yet she knew her presence here would be questioned. The orientation room was a sleek conference space, its walls lined with plaques and framed photographs of past directors, all of whom shared the same familiar profile: white, male, powerful. A handful of new hires had already gathered, some nurses, a few residents, engaged in polite, guarded small talk. Conversations slowed when Miranda entered. She gave them a brief nod, choosing a seat near the side, away from the clusters. No introductions were offered. Minutes later, the room fell silent as a tall figure entered. Dr. Edward Adamson. His reputation had preceded him, the head of surgery, renowned for his surgical brilliance and equally infamous for his harsh, domineering leadership style. His tailored lab coat, perfectly ironed, bore his name stitched in bold, and his salt and pepper hair was combed with exacting precision. He carried himself like a man accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. His cold, steel-gray eyes scanned the newcomers, and when they landed on Miranda, they paused, a flicker of something unreadable, sharp and assessing. The pause was brief but weighted. Then his lips pressed into a thin line. "Welcome to Northern Peak," he began, his voice deep, precise, and devoid of warmth. "Excellence here is not a goal, it is the baseline. Mediocrity has no place within these walls. If you are here, it means you passed the preliminary filters. But passing filters and surviving in my hospital are two different things." Miranda felt the sting of his gaze, the words crafted like scalpels, cutting into assumptions. He hadn't singled her out by name, but she felt targeted all the same. As the orientation concluded, the group dispersed quickly, eager to escape Adamson's icy presence. Miranda was gathering her materials when his voice sliced through the thinning crowd. "Holt?" She turned, her spine straightening. "Yes, doctor?" Adamson approached with an air of casual authority, though his eyes were anything but casual, sharp, dissecting. "I reviewed your file," he said coolly. "ICU trauma experience. Impressive. On paper." A pause, calculated and cutting. "I trust you understand that pedigree matters little without performance. Here, you either prove your worth or become a liability. Understood?" Miranda's jaw tightened. She felt the unspoken, "you don't belong here," humming beneath his words. She met his stare without flinching. "Understood," she replied evenly. "I've never had a problem proving myself." A slow, cold smile ghosted across his lips. "We'll see." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, his dismissal as palpable as the tension he left in his wake. The afternoon was a baptism by fire. While other new hires shadowed senior nurses for orientation, Adamson sent Miranda directly into the ICU, a trial by pressure and chaos. She was assigned to the most critical patients, each case demanding rapid decisions and steady nerves. But this was Miranda's domain. In a flash of urgency, her instincts ignited. She stabilized a post-op patient whose oxygen levels plummeted, silenced a crashing alarm with swift intervention, and handled a combative patient with calm authority. Her pulse pounded, but her hands were sure. The storm of the ICU was where she felt most alive. Yet, despite her seamless performance, the atmosphere from her colleagues remained glacial. Cold glances, stiff replies, no offers of help. She overheard two nurses whispering as she passed. "New girl's trying too hard." "She won't last under Adamson." She kept walking, her face an unreadable mask, but inside a fire sparked. That evening, the hospital buzzed with unexpected activity. A high-priority trauma case arrived by helicopter, a patient transferred under extraordinary secrecy. The ER doors burst open with a flurry of paramedics, and at their center, on a gurney, lay a man, unconscious, his face pale and bruised. His injuries were severe: broken ribs, a fractured arm, internal bleeding, but his bearing, even in vulnerability, hinted at someone significant. His suit, now bloodied, was expensive. His watch, though cracked, was of a rare brand that only the highest echelon wore. Adamson himself appeared, his manner brisk. "I want the best monitoring on him, around the clock." His eyes then, calculating as ever, found Miranda. "Holt, you're assigned to him." A flicker of something passed through the room. Surprise, disbelief, whispers. "He's given her the VIP? What's he playing at?" But Miranda knew. This was no honor. This was a test, a trap. If the patient's condition deteriorated, the blame would fall squarely on her. She lifted her chin. "Understood, doctor." The patient's name, Nicholas Kane. Vital signs, unstable but holding. As Miranda worked through the night, her fingers moved with precision, checking drips, adjusting monitors, ensuring every detail was immaculate. She charted his progress with meticulous care, and she felt it. The eyes. From the observation glass, someone was watching her, not with disdain, but with curiosity. It was him. Though his injuries should have kept him unconscious, Kane's half-lidded eyes, clouded with pain but keen with perception, followed her movements. Their gazes met, and for a fraction of a second, something passed between them, an unspoken understanding. Then his eyes closed, and the machines resumed their steady beeping, but Miranda felt it. The storm was only beginning. The fluorescent lights of the ICU cast a harsh, sterile glow over the ward, their hum blending with the rhythmic beeps of heart monitors and the soft rustle of rubber soles on polished floors. The familiar scent of antiseptic lingered, sharp and clinical. It was early morning, and Miranda Holt had barely stepped onto the floor when the tension in the air pressed against her skin, thick and suffocating. She felt the shift immediately, the way conversations hushed as she passed, the fleeting glances from her colleagues that carried more judgment than acknowledgement. Her assignment board flashed her tasks for the day. Her name appeared again and again, tagged to the most difficult patients, complex cases that required precision, resilience, and, most importantly, endurance. It was a workload twice as heavy as her colleagues, a punishment thinly veiled as a challenge. She knew exactly who was behind it. Dr. Edward Adamson had made his message clear. He intended to break her. The morning's chaos began without preamble. Her first patient, a middle-aged man recovering from bypass surgery, crashed minutes after her assessment, his blood pressure plummeting without warning. The alarm blared, and Miranda moved on instinct. "Sodium, bicarb, now," she ordered, her voice sharp and steady. A junior nurse hesitated. "Are you sure? The chart—" "I said now." The ampule was in her hand a second later. She administered it, and within moments the monitor showed the faintest climb, blood pressure stabilizing, pulse steadying. The junior nurse stared at her wide-eyed. You caught it!" Miranda barely paused. "The signs were there if you know where to look. Get him prepped for an echo. We need to be sure." The tension in the room dissipated as the crisis passed, but Miranda felt no relief. She knew what would come next, and as if summoned, Adamson arrived, his stride slow but charged with authority. His eyes flicked to the monitor, then to the patient's chart, then, finally, predator-like, to Miranda. "Interesting," he said, his voice smooth but sharp beneath the surface. "You deviated from the attendance protocol." Miranda's eyes met his unwavering. The patient was in metabolic acidosis. Waiting for a full workup would have killed him. A long, cold pause, then, "A bold gamble, Holt. I hope your record reflects the outcome you claim. Otherwise—" He let the threat hang in the sterile air. Without waiting for a reply, he turned and walked away, leaving behind the unspoken warning. By midday, the hostility had thickened. Miranda felt it not only from Adamson, but from the entire unit. Colleagues who should have been teammates became obstacles. Simple requests were met with delays or indifference. Supply orders for her patients mysteriously went missing. Handoff reports were incomplete, and critical pages were accidentally ignored. The whispers followed her like shadows. "Think she's showing off? Adamson's testing her. She won't last. She's just lucky, that's all." In the break room, Miranda overheard two nurses. "You saw how he's loading her shifts, right? It's brutal. She's lucky to even be here. What did she expect?" The second nurse's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Honestly, I don't trust her with the high-risk cases. You never know." Miranda entered the room and the voices stopped, their owners dissolving into feigned focus on coffee cups and charts. She felt the burn of their assumptions on her back. Her reprieve, if it could be called that, came in room 412, Nicholas Kane's private suite. Unlike the hostility of the ICU, Kane's room felt still, isolated but not cold. The man himself, despite his injuries, radiated a quiet intensity that matched her own. Today, he was more awake, his eyes sharper than before. "You look worse than me," he said dryly, his voice hoarse but amused. Miranda allowed herself a soft, tired smile as she adjusted his IV. "Rough crowd, but I'm used to it." Kane watched her with a gaze that felt uncomfortably knowing. "Used to it? Interesting choice of words." She glanced at him, but he said nothing more. The evening shift brought fresh hostility. Adamson, with a subtle cruelty, reassigned her from Kane's case to another patient known throughout the unit for his vitriol. Mr. Henderson, a retired officer with a reputation for breaking down even the most seasoned nurses, was as combative as he was ailing. His chart read like a novel of complications: heart failure, diabetes, and a foul temper sharpened by pain and prejudice. The moment she entered, his gaze, cold and assessing, landed on her skin before her scrubs. "You?" His lip curled in disgust. "They sent you? Get me someone who knows what they're doing." Miranda felt the familiar sting, but kept her voice even. "I'm your nurse, Mr. Henderson. Let's check your vitals." He barked a laugh that carried venom. "I don't want your hands on me. Find someone else. I don't trust—" His voice dipped into something dark, something she had heard too many times. "Your kind." She felt her pulse spike, but her hand remained steady as she adjusted the cuff around his arm. "I assure you," she said, her voice cool, "your heart doesn't care what color my skin is, only that I know how to keep it beating." What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that from the observation room, someone was watching. Kane, his eyes slightly narrowed, had requested the live patient feed for his room and beyond, a privilege granted only to someone of his status. He heard every word. And he saw something else. Through the cold, venomous rejection, he saw her resolve. She didn't flinch, didn't crack. She endured. His fingers tapped once against the edge of his blanket. Interesting. But Adamson was relentless. By the end of her shift, Miranda was dragging. Her body ached from the strain, her mind from the constant hostility. As she charted her cases at the nurse's station, Adamson approached, placing a thick folder on her desk with a theatrical thump. "Holt," he said, his voice laced with mock concern, "since you're so adept at multitasking, I trust you can handle these additional case reports. They're urgent." The pile was twice what any other nurse had. The room was silent, the audience waiting for her reaction. She met his eyes, her exhaustion burning behind her ribs. "Of course, doctor," she said, her voice crisp but smooth. "I'll handle it. Competence tends to scale." For the briefest moment, something flickered in Adamson's eyes. Surprise, then something colder. He didn't like the defiance. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a private, venomous murmur. "Let's see how long you last under pressure. You'll break, Holt. They always do." And then he walked away. But she wouldn't break. She couldn't. Not here. Not now. As the clock ticked toward midnight and the ward settled into the eerie hum of machines and distant footsteps, Miranda sat alone at the station, the weight of the day pressing down on her shoulders, but not her spirit. She felt the war that was building around her, and inside her, something forged under pressure, stronger than any blade Adamson could wield. In the shadows of his room, Nicholas Kane closed the live feed, his expression unreadable. His voice, low and thoughtful, broke the silence. "She doesn't break." He leaned back against his pillows, a faint, calculating smile forming. Good. The game was only beginning. The operating room pulsed with cold intensity. Overhead lights glaring white, the steady beep of monitors marking the seconds with mechanical precision. The air was thick with antiseptic and tension. Every surface gleamed with surgical sterility, every instrument placed in perfect readiness. The room buzzed with quiet urgency as the surgical team prepped for what had been labeled a high-risk, high-profile operation. At the center of it all lay Nicholas Kane, unconscious beneath a sterile drape, his body broken from trauma, but his presence still commanding the room even in silence. His vitals flickered on the monitor, stable but fragile. Miranda Holt stood scrubbed and ready, her gloved hands steady, her heart a controlled rhythm beneath her gown. She felt the eyes on her, watching, waiting. The unspoken tension was palpable. She wasn't supposed to be here. Not for this. But Adamson had made certain of it. The announcement had come abruptly that morning. Just as Miranda began her shift, a critical operation was scheduled for Kane, a complex thoracic and abdominal procedure with multiple surgeons involved, the kind of case that made reputations. And Adamson, with that razor-thin smile of his, had handpicked Miranda to assist. It wasn't a reward. It was a crucible. She understood the stakes immediately. If anything went wrong, if she missed a beat, if she made the slightest error, Adamson would ensure she bore the blame. And this time the fallout wouldn't be whispers or cold shoulders. It would be her career. But Miranda wasn't one to flinch. The room was cold, the kind that seeped through layers of surgical gowns and gloves. Machines chirped and pulsed, a symphony of human fragility and technological precision. The chief anesthesiologist called out, "Vitals steady, BP holding at 118/75. Adamson entered last, his presence chilling the room even further. His voice, clipped and authoritative, sliced through the surgical masks. "Let's proceed. Nurse Holt," he added, his gaze finding her, "stay sharp. I'll expect you to keep up or step out." His meaning was clear. This was a test, and he expected her to fail. The first incision was swift, Adamson's blade cutting with practiced precision. The surgical field became a battlefield, exposing layers of flesh and fragile organs, revealing the damage that trauma had wrought. Miranda's hands moved without hesitation, anticipating Adamson's needs before he could voice them. Suction, clamp, retractor. She anticipated every tool, every motion, the rhythm of the operation etched into her muscles from years on the front lines of trauma care. But Adamson, true to form, began testing her in subtler ways, snapping orders in rapid succession, demanding instruments without naming them fully, skipping the surgical shorthand they all knew, a tactic meant to trip her, to slow her down, to expose hesitation. Miranda didn't stumble. She matched his pace, command for command, her movements smooth and exact. But then the complication struck, a sudden spike on the monitor, Kane's blood pressure plummeting. "BP's crashing, 60/40, the anesthesiologist barked. Adamson's hand paused. "Bleed! Clamp it!" he snapped. A sudden flood of blood filled the cavity thick and fast. A vessel had ruptured, hidden damage beneath layers of trauma. Adamson moved to clamp, but his hand, steady until now, wavered by a fraction, hesitation seizing him in the crucial second. Miranda saw it, saw the artery's position, saw the wrong angle he was about to take, too deep, too forceful. He was about to sever rather than seal, and Kane would bleed out. Her voice cut through the chaos, clear and firm. "Doctor, stop. Wrong vector. Approach from the inferior angle. You'll collapse the artery." The room froze. The weight of her interruption, her defiance, hung in the sterile air. Adamson's eyes, hard and cold above his mask, snapped to hers. And in that instant, she saw his choice. His pride or Kane's life. For a fraction of a heartbeat, his fingers tightened on the clamp. Then, without a word, he adjusted, followed her direction. A new clamp, a slower, shallower angle. The bleed slowed, then stopped. "BP stabilizing," the anesthesiologist called, voice tight with relief. 85/55 and rising. The tension in the room didn't ease. It changed, because everyone knew what had just happened. Miranda had saved the patient. She had saved his patient, but no one dared speak it. The operation continued for another grueling hour. Miranda remained unshaken, every move precise, every decision swift. When the final sutures were placed and the incision closed, the room seemed to exhale in collective exhaustion. Adamson, however, wasted no time. The moment the patient was wheeled out, he turned, his voice cutting and low. "Holt, with me." He led her from the sterile confines of the OR into a private consultation room. White walls, a monitor still displaying Kane's vitals. The door clicked shut behind them. The cold mask of his professionalism peeled back, revealing something sharper. "You dared to question me?" His voice was quiet but thrumming with venom. "In my OR?" Miranda's pulse pounded, but her voice was steady. "I questioned your angle, doctor, not your authority, and I was right." His eyes burned into hers. "You were out of line, and Kane would be dead if I hadn't been." The silence was razor-edged, his fists curled at his sides. "Let me be very clear, Holt," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "I don't care how skilled you think you are. You are here because of a system that tolerates quotas and politics, not because you belong. You are exactly where I'm supposed to be," she interrupted, her voice hard as steel. "And you know it." The air crackled. His lips curled into something between a snarl and a smirk. "That arrogance will cost you. I could end your career before you ever have one here. And if Kane had died because of your ego," she shot back, "who would you have answered to?" The door suddenly opened behind them, and a voice, low, firm, and utterly unexpected, spoke. "To me." Adamson's face froze. Miranda turned and saw Nicholas Kane, awake, standing. His voice, though rough from the anesthesia, carried a weight that silenced the room. His eyes, sharp and cold as a judge's, locked onto Adamson. "I heard everything," Kane said, his voice slow but cutting. "Every word, every threat, every insult." Adamson's composure shattered, his face paling. "Mr. Kane, You will not interrupt me." The room felt smaller, the air charged. Kane's gaze flicked to Miranda, and for the first time she saw something different in his eyes. Not just calculation, but recognition. Then he turned back to Adamson. "You put your pride over my life," he said, his voice tightening. "And when Holt saved it, you tried to bury her under your arrogance." Adamson's voice, thin with desperation, found purchase. "This is a misunderstanding." "No," Kane cut in, cold and final. "The only misunderstanding was thinking you were untouchable." He paused, letting the silence sharpen the blow. "That changes now." The fallout was swift. Within hours, the hospital board was summoned. Video recordings from the OR and patient observation feeds, authorized under Kane's directive, were reviewed. The evidence was damning. Adamson's hesitation, Miranda's intervention, his threats behind closed doors. By the day's end, Edward Adamson was suspended pending a formal investigation. His name stripped from the surgical roster. The news spread like wildfire. The whispers that had shadowed Miranda for weeks turned into a stunned silence, then a slow-growing wave of respect, some grudging, some genuine. But Miranda didn't bask in it. She didn't celebrate, because she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. As she prepared to leave that night, she found Kane waiting for her near the exit, a faint shadow of exhaustion on his face, but his eyes still sharp. "Nurse Holt," he greeted, his voice softer now, but still weighted. "Or should I say, the woman who saved my life." Miranda met his gaze, searching his expression. "You planned this," she said quietly. "Didn't you?" A corner of his mouth lifted, wry but not unkind. "Not the surgery, but yes, I've been watching." He paused. "You don't break." His eyes, calculating and certain, held hers. "And that's exactly the kind of person I need." Her brow furrowed. "For what?" Kane's smile sharpened. "To help me tear this place down and rebuild it properly." The storm had passed, but the war was just beginning. The atmosphere inside Northern Peak Medical Center was electric, charged with the aftermath of the operation and the sudden, seismic fallout from Kane's revelations. Whispers flooded every corridor, every break room. Nurses gathered in huddles, their voices low but frantic. Doctors exchanged guarded glances, their expressions tight with unease. The once untouchable facade of the hospital had cracked wide open, and through it spilled the rot that had long festered beneath. The news had spread quickly. Dr. Edward Adamson, the hospital's feared and revered head of surgery, suspended pending investigation. The reason? His negligence during Kane's surgery and his documented harassment of Nurse Miranda Holt. Even more stunning, Nicholas Kane himself, the hospital's VIP patient, was far more than that. He was their most powerful investor. The emergency staff meeting was called with unprecedented urgency. The entire hospital, from physicians to administrative staff, was summoned to the main auditorium. The room, usually reserved for quarterly briefings, now overflowed with tension. Rows of white coats and scrubs packed the seats, faces strained with anticipation, confusion, and, in some cases, dread. At the front, a podium stood ready, flanked by members of the hospital board, most with stony expressions, but it was the man standing beside them who commanded every eye. Nicholas Kane. Dressed now in a tailored suit, his arm still braced from his injuries, he carried the same air of authority he had wielded in the operating room, only now it was sharpened to a blade. His gaze swept the room once before he stepped to the microphone, his voice cutting through the nervous murmur like a scalpel through flesh. "Good morning," he began, his tone cold, businesslike. "For those of you who don't know me," his lips curled faintly, "I am Nicholas Kane, investor, patient, and witness." A ripple of whispers ran through the room. Kane continued, his voice tightening. "I came to this hospital expecting the highest standard of care. What I experienced instead was something far more telling, a culture of hostility, prejudice, and arrogance. I witnessed not only a failure of professionalism, but a failure of character." His eyes, sharp and cutting, found faces in the crowd, faces that quickly lowered their gaze. "And that," he said, his voice hardening, "ends today." The impact was immediate. First came the investigation results, swift and damning. The hospital board, under Kane's directive, presented their findings. Dr. Edward Adamson's pattern of discriminatory behavior and intimidation, corroborated by witness statements and recorded footage from surgical suites and observation rooms. Documentation of unequal workload distribution, targeting Nurse Miranda Holt. Fabricated performance complaints designed to discredit her. And, most critically, his near-fatal error during Kane's surgery, saved only by Holt's intervention. The room fell into a tense, frozen silence as the board delivered their final resolution. "Effective immediately," the chairman announced, his voice firm but heavy, "Dr. Edward Adamson is hereby terminated from Northern Peak Medical Center. His medical license will be referred for review by the state board for potential revocation." The gasp from the crowd was collective, a mixture of shock, relief, and, from some, disbelief. The fall of a titan, But the reckoning wasn't over. Kane stepped forward once more. "The removal of one man," he said coldly, "does not fix what is broken here." His eyes swept the room and his voice dropped into something quieter, more dangerous. "You all saw it. You all knew it, and you allowed it to fester." The accusation settled over them like lead. Miranda Holt sat toward the back, her hands clenched against her knees, her heart pounding. She felt the stares, a sudden shift in attention. Some were curious, others were wary, and some were resentful, their pride pricked by what they now knew, that she had stood firm while they had looked away. Kane's voice rose again. "This hospital will change, not through slogans or half-measures, but through accountability and action." He paused, his next words striking like a hammer. "And, leading that change," he said, his gaze landing squarely on her, "will be Nurse Miranda Holt." A murmur swept through the crowd, confusion, surprise, some outrage. Miranda felt the air leave her lungs. She rose slowly, her face unreadable, and made her way to the front, the weight of every eye in the room pressing against her spine. She met Kane's gaze, her voice low but firm. "You didn't ask me," she said, her words measured but charged with meaning. Kane's expression was faintly wry, but his voice was resolute. "No, I didn't." His eyes, though, held something sharp and knowing. "But you're exactly who they need, and you know it." Miranda turned to face the crowd. The people who had ignored her, shunned her, watched her fight alone. Her voice, when it came, was clear, steady, and strong. "I didn't come here to lead," she said plainly. "I came here to do my job, to help people. But what I found was a place where power mattered more than patience, where silence covered up failure, where fear let the worst among you flourish." She paused, letting the silence breathe, her gaze sweeping across their faces. "You all saw what Adamson did, and you stayed quiet. Some of you helped him, some of you let it happen, but all of you were part of the system that allowed it." The tension in the room thickened. "But," she continued, her voice tightening with something like steel, "if I've learned anything here, it's that silence is complicity." She lifted her chin. "So if I'm going to lead, I'll lead by breaking that silence." Her next words rang out hard and clear. "Change is coming, and every single one of you has a choice. Help fix what's broken or get out of the way." The room hung in charged silence, and then applause. It began small, scattered, a few hands tentative but firm. Then it grew, swelling into something undeniable. Nurses, some who had once turned their backs on her, now stood clapping. A few doctors, then more. Not everyone, but enough. The days that followed ignited a firestorm. The hospital's reforms, backed by Kane's authority and Miranda's leadership, began swiftly and without compromise. A full review of staff conduct, performance, and behavioral records were audited. Those found complicit in misconduct were reprimanded or dismissed. Mandatory inclusion and ethics training, not just a formality but a requirement, led by external experts and survivors of medical discrimination. Revamping hiring and promotion processes. Transparency became the standard, and recommendations gave way to merit. Some staff quit outright, unwilling to accept the new order. Others grumbled but stayed, their resentment simmering beneath uneasy compliance. But a growing number, especially younger nurses and residents, rallied behind the change. The culture, once built on silence, began to shift. Through it all, Miranda worked, not behind a desk, but on the floor. She was still a nurse, still walking the halls, still answering call lights, still holding patients' hands. But now, when she spoke, the room listened. The respect she earned was hard-won and not universal, but it was real. A month after Adamson's fall, Miranda found herself on the hospital rooftop, the chill wind brushing against her skin. She wasn't alone. Nicholas Kane stood beside her, his injuries healing, his gaze thoughtful as it swept the horizon. "Quite the mess," he said, his voice wry. "But progress always is." Miranda's voice was quieter. "It's not over." "No," Kane agreed, his eyes flicking to her. "It's just beginning." She turned to him, her expression sharp. "You didn't just want to fix this hospital, did you?" His lips curled faintly, but his voice carried steel. "No, this is the first crack in a much bigger wall." His gaze met hers, cool but certain. "And if you're willing, I want you to help me tear it down. Everywhere." A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken possibility. Miranda looked out over the city, the vast network of hospitals and institutions where the same battles were waiting, unseen but no less real. Her jaw tightened. Her heart burned. Then, "I'm in." Below, the lights of Northern Peak blazed into the night, a monument not to what had been, but to what would be. The reckoning had come, and it was only the beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more powerful narratives and inspiring journeys. Share this video with your friends to spread the message, and check out our other videos for more stories that challenge, captivate, and inspire. See you in the next one.